Russia has fired more than 24 missiles at Kyiv, attacking the Ukrainian capital for the first time in 6 weeks, and sending panicked residents flooding into the relative safety of the subway system, in a scene reminiscent of the first weeks of the war. Today is Friday, March 23rd, 2024, and this is the Dunkley Report. Russia has fired more than 24 missiles at Kyiv, attacking the Ukrainian capital for the first time in 6 weeks, and sending panicked residents flooding into the relative safety of the subway system, in a scene reminiscent of the first weeks of the war. Air defenses shot down all 31 of the missiles early Thursday, though officials say the falling wreckage still damaged apartment buildings and injured 13 people, including a child. The attack happened a day after Russian President Vladimir Putin threatened to respond in kind to recent Ukrainian aerial attacks on the Russian border region of Belgorod, which Russian officials say have killed civilians. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged the West to send more air defense systems. President Vladimir Putin has thanked Russians for casting ballots in a presidential vote in which he cemented his grip on the country for another 6 years, after the harshest crackdown on dissent since Soviet times. Any public criticism of Putin or his war in Ukraine has been stifled. Independent media have been crippled. His fiercest political foe, Alexei Navalny, died in an Arctic prison last month, and other opposition activists are either in jail or in exile. Western leaders denounced the vote as a sham. Speaking in a video address after the announcement of the final results of the March 15-17 balloting, which showed him winning 87% of the votes, Putin said they reflected strong public backing of his policies. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that a major Israeli ground assault on the southern Gaza town of Rafah would be a mistake and unnecessary to defeating Hamas. His comments underscore the further souring of relations between the United States and Israel. Blinken is on his 6th urgent Mideast mission since the war began. He spoke Thursday after huddling with top Arab diplomats in Cairo for discussions over efforts for a ceasefire and over ideas for Gaza's post-conflict future. He said an immediate, sustained ceasefire with the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas is urgently needed, and that gaps are narrowing in indirect negotiations that U.S., Egypt, and Qatar have spent weeks mediating. A 12-year-old boy in East Jerusalem lights the fuse of a long firework and hoists it in the air. Then, just before it explodes and illuminates the night sky with a burst of red, he is shot in the chest by Israeli police and falls to the ground. A clip of Rami Halhuli's final moments last week has been circulating on social media for days. Human rights activists say it shines a light on the surge of Palestinians, including dozens of children, who have been killed without justification by Israeli forces since Oct 7. The Israeli government says the shooting is under investigation. Center-right alliance led by the Social Democratic Party has won Portugal's general election by a slender margin. It is set to form a minority government that could have a difficult term in office as a radical right populist party that came third in the voting. tries to get a hand on the levers of power. Results published late Wednesday after votes from abroad were counted in the March 10. Balloting gave the Democratic Alliance 80 seats in the 230-seat National Assembly, Portugal's parliament. The center-left Socialist Party placed second with 78 seats. The hard-right Chega, Enough party collected 50 seats, up from 12 seats in a 2022 election, in a staggering surge that upends traditional politics in Portugal. A lawyer for the Wall Street Journal says Russia must face consequences for its detention of Evan Gershkovich, one of the newspaper's reporters. Gershkovich was arrested on March 29, 2023, on espionage charges, which he and the newspaper deny, while on a reporting trip to the Russian city of Yekaterinburg, in the Ural Mountains. The U.S. government has designated him as wrongfully detained, and Russian authorities have detailed no evidence to support the charges. Jason Conte, the Dow Jones General Counsel, said at an event in Washington on Thursday, marking the approaching one-year anniversary of Gershkovich's arrest, that some sort of consequences were needed as a deterrence. European Union leaders have agreed in principle to open membership negotiations with Bosnia-Herzegovina, even though the Western Balkan country must still do a lot of work before talks can begin. The 27 leaders gave the political green light at a summit in Brussels after the European Commission. The EU's executive arm last week agreed to start talks in spite of deep lingering ethnic divisions in the nation, with 3.2 million inhabitants. Pope Francis has defrocked a notorious Belgian bishop who admitted 14 years ago that he sexually abused his nephew, but faced no Vatican punishment. The case of Roger Vangeloue, the emeritus bishop of Bruges, long ago became a symbol of the Catholic Church's hypocrisy and dysfunction in dealing with cases of abuse. Not only was he allowed to quietly retire after the scandal broke in 2010, but his superior, Cardinal Godfried de Niels, was caught on tape asking one of his victims to keep the abuse secret until the bishop left office. The announcement of his laicization Thursday comes a few months before the Pope is due to visit Belgium, where the case would have been an unwelcome and problematic distraction. U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas says that a Texas law giving state authorities the power to arrest and deport migrants who have entered the country illegally is unconstitutional. Mayorkas spoke Thursday during a joint news conference with Guatemala President Bernardo Arévalo in the Guatemalan capital. Mayorkas says, "It is our strongly held view as a matter of law that SB 4, the Texas law, is unconstitutional, and it is our hope and confidence that the courts will strike it down with finality." A 3-judge panel of the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals heard arguments on the Texas law Wednesday, but did not rule. The law is on hold for now. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he will share alternatives to Israel's planned ground assault into the southern Gaza town of Rafah when he meets with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his war cabinet this week. Blinken spoke in Cairo Thursday during his 6th visit to the region during the Israel-Hamas war. He'll travel to Israel on Friday. Despite growing disagreements between Netanyahu and President Joe Biden over Israel's prosecution of the war, Biden's policy of providing Israel with crucial military aid and diplomatic support remains unchanged. The health ministry in Gaza has raised its death toll to nearly 32,000 Palestinians, as international agencies warn that famine is imminent in northern Gaza. Today's news has been reported by the Associated Press. This has been the World News for Friday, March 23rd, 2024. Thanks again for joining us at the Dunkley Report